going out there? I'm working on yet another video for my McLaren 12C. I'm going to be changing out the shifter paddles. I'm going to show what's involved in doing that. With the 12C and the 650S, this was the shifter paddle. It's a fulcrum design. You can see as you pull in one side, the other side pushes out. So you could use one hand to upshift and downshift. The only thing about them is they're very small. And there were no options to change this out. This is just the way the cars were spec'd all the way through the 650S model. Years following, they offered what was called an MSO, extended carbon shifter option. MSO stands for McLaren Special Operations. And you could get the car spec'd with the larger carbon paddles. So even today, you will see newer cars like the 720S still spec'd with the small paddles. This is an upgraded option. With this being a newer generation McLaren option, they're only offered in a satin finish on the blades. You cannot get these gloss or shiny. Carbon interior parts on the 12C and the 650S were all gloss. Several years later with other models, they started to include the matte carbon finish or semi-gloss or no gloss. So what I did with these, I took them to my buffer and I put a little bit of a polish on them. Doesn't look exactly like the carbon in the car right now, but it's a much better match to what they used to look like. So with the install, first thing you want to do, make sure the door is open. The reason being, you're going to need to disconnect the battery because you're going to be removing the steering wheel, and that involves removing the airbag. You never want to mess with any kind of safety system on these cars, like the seat belts or airbag, while the battery is connected. For one, the airbag could potentially go off in your face and also trip a code in the car that has to be reset by the dealer. The next step is going to be disconnect the battery, and that involves removing most of this front trunk assembly. So here are all the fasteners that had to be removed to get this insert out. See all the way around here. There's the carpet and a flimsy piece of plastic trim to cover up all those fasteners and a seal, and that would be for the HVAC inlet. So once all those are loose, you just simply grab a hold of this and lift up and out, and then right there's our battery. Only need to disconnect the negative terminal. That's located right here. Negative terminal disconnected. I wrapped a rag around it to reduce any chances of it arcing against something metal. And at this point, we're gonna disconnect the airbag. Now, after a little bit of research online, I found out that to get the steering wheel off, you must get the airbag off first. The airbag has to be removed, and to do that, there's a spring, there's a large circle spring that holds the airbag against the steering wheel. And to get that out, you have to run a flathead screwdriver or something that will allow access through this little opening right here. And you can see this one, it's either already been cut or has a slot. You can see a slot right there. I do know that the steering wheel has been removed from this car because I had this entire assembly with the stalks replaced a little over a year ago. I'm sorry about that, the focus is not working. I had this whole stock assembly replaced because the turn signal would sometimes not disengage after making a left-hand turn. So we're going to take some sort of a tool, probably a Torx head or a Phillips head, maybe a flat head. I'm going to run it through this hole, and there's one on the other side. You have to push in at just the right point, and it'll disengage the spring and allow the airbag to be popped out. Ran that up through. It's a little tricky to show this. Ran this up through there, and you can feel a little bit of resistance. It's spring resistance. I pushed in while pulling out on the airbag, and boom, disconnected it. Very simple. From here you can see there's a few connections that have to be removed. To remove the airbag wires, you have to lift up on this red lock, and then the wire will pull right out. You also have a small ground wire right here. All right, the airbag has been removed, and now you can see the spring that holds the airbag in place right here. This spring here and here hooks onto these posts. And by sticking the screwdriver, you can see right here where it goes through here, and then you're pushing on the spring in there, right here. Tricky to line up when you're trying to record what you're doing. But you can kind of see when I nail it just right, boom. Push that in, it releases the airbag. And of course, to put the airbag back on, after the wires are reconnected, just push it on, and it'll pop into place. Next step is to remove the steering wheel. Looks like we just have to use a really large Allen socket right here. I'm going to attempt to remove this with just a 1/2-inch drive ratchet. I really don't know how tight they put these on. It's possible I may need to use an impact wrench. All right, I did have to use an impact wrench. The interesting thing about these cars, they don't have a steering wheel lock. So for one person to try to loosen this with one hand on a ratchet and one hand on the wheel I couldn't do it. It wasn't possible for me. So I just used my cheap electric impact wrench. It knocked it loose within seconds. And from here I can remove the bolt, and steering wheel should just pull right off. Got to be careful not to damage any of these wires for the airbag. That's what the bolt looks like. Once the steering wheel is pulled a few inches away and off of the shaft, you'll see there is a harness here that has to be disconnected. It's this one right here. And then the 2 airbag wires, you have to fish through this opening right here. I'm kind of wondering if the steering wheel was keyed to the steering wheel shaft. It doesn't really appear to be. I went ahead and marked with a Sharpie where it is on the shaft versus the splines inside of the wheel right here, so I can get exactly the way it was. And also there's a factory paint mark that indicates proper indexing. That's what the steering wheel looks like removed from the car. Look at the back of the factory shifter paddles. You can see that fulcrum mechanism and how it operates. It's a push-pull. The next thing that needs to be removed is this retaining plate that holds the airbag on, and then I will have access to the 4 6mm bolts that hold the paddle to the wheel. All 3 of the bolts are loose. It took a T30 Torx screwdriver. Lift this thing up and out of the way. Get this harness out of the way. There's a spring in here that fell out. Oh, there's springs under each bolt right here to have that spring. A T25 will be used to remove these four. I really believe I need to get some sort of a mount for my phone so these videos are a little more seamless. But you get the idea. These two and the other two. Paddle has been successfully removed from the steering wheel. I'm going to show you there is a spring here that allows tension for the fulcrum action. You will remove that and transfer it over to the new shifter paddles. I'm going to flip the wheel over. I'm going to show you what we have here. See, it's a very simple setup. This is what actually shifts the gears. These little switches. And that might be some sort of a limiter switch. I really don't know. It's just spring loaded. But the shifts are actually initiated from these. So that's the clicking sound you hear whenever you pull back and push forward on the shifter paddles. All right, the new paddles are on. The kit did include 4 new 6mm Torx bolts. I had some titanium ones laying around, so I went in and installed those. It's going to reduce some weight and they won't rust. Looks cool, even though you will never see it. I did also notice a bit of a design change. If you look here, you can see that is a red rubber. And that's what pushes against, you can see back in there, that's what pushes against the shifter switch. Well, the original one has hard plastic nubs right there. And they're recessed a little bit. So what I noticed is, comparatively speaking, between the original and this one, there was always a little bit of free play. There was a big gap in there. Now there's very little movement before it clicks the gear. This could have been a refinement, or it could have more to do with the larger paddles wanting to decrease the tolerance because it might have magnified that little bit of play that was in there prior. Well, at this point, I'm just going to reverse this assembly. I'll reinstall the airbag retaining assembly and then reinstall the wheel. Before I reinstall the airbag spring assembly, I'm going to point out exactly where it is you're pushing when you run the screwdriver through this little nub of the steering wheel. It's pushing right here, and that flexes the spring inward just enough to clear those retaining posts. Also, this retaining plate is what actuates the horn. That's why it is on springs. You push that, and then it'll activate the switch for the horn. And here it is installed back onto the car. All that's left now is to reconnect the battery, put the trunk assembly all back the way it was, and take it for a test drive. Overall, as far as the DIY is concerned, this is incredibly easy. So I hope everyone out there watching enjoys this, and those who are looking to replace their own shifter paddles find some value in this video. Thank you all for watching.